right, so this is the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra. It's Xiaomi's latest and greatest creation for 2021 with a camera bump the size of the moon on the back. It's a big one. So you might have seen that I posted a picture of this phone on Twitter and I asked just, would you rock a phone like this? And the answers were mostly two things. One, no, just make the rest of the phone thicker to match the thickness of the camera bump. Just add some battery and make it flush. Or two, yeah, if the camera is actually amazing. All right, well, that being said, let's just jump straight into this camera, shall we? Also, stay tuned to the end of this video where I have a trailer for Retro Tech Season 2. It's finally ready and it's a world's largest in some way. So the primary sensor is the world's largest camera sensor in a smartphone. Then the ultra wide gives you the world's largest field of view, the widest ultra wide of any I've seen in a smartphone. And the zoom at 120x is the biggest zoom in any smartphone so far. So right off the bat, on paper, pretty impressive. So all right, the main camera. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a 1/1.12 inch sensor. That is really close to 1 inch. And you know what else has a 1 inch sensor? The Sony RX100. Now, of course, that also has a whole real optical zoom lens and it can do a lot more. It's a dedicated point and shoot. But to fit nearly the same size sensor inside a smartphone is pretty incredible. It's kind of hard to understand how awesome that is. So that 50 megapixel sensor bends down to 12 megapixels, has an f1.95 aperture and OIS. Now, if all the time. So literally anytime you have a close-up subject, you can count on the background being blurred out of focus. None of these shots are portrait mode. This is just straight snapping photos. It absolutely epitomizes that big sensor look in a smartphone. But guess what? That also means if you have even more close-up subjects like I do, you're gonna start to see fringing around the outsides because the plane of focus is so thin that most of the object, unless it's flat, is actually going to be slightly out of focus. We've seen this from other big sensor smartphones. I do really like the processing though, I gotta say. It's very naturally sharp. It's not like this over-processed, hyper-sharpened look like I've seen a lot lately. So these are just some of the photos I've been taking with it. There's plenty of detail and information, and when you zoom in, they retain that detail. So that part's really nice. Aside from that though, the colors aren't really all that amazing to me. The HDR works well, though it does still occasionally overdo it. And the fringing sometimes gets really annoying when you have very close-up subjects, and I take a lot of those. But generally, this camera's quite nice at not looking overprocessed. Until nighttime. So that huge sensor is, the Xiaomi is a little brighter, and more importantly, it took less time than the other one. All right, so then, the ultra-wide. This ultra-wide camera with a 128 degree field of view. So look, I've seen a lot of ultra-wides on the back of phones in my day ever since that LG G5. And I think it's safe to say this is the widest ultra-wide I've seen yet. It gives you the biggest field of view. And it has a lot of the same processing characteristics as the main camera. It's 48 megapixels and it's got the detail, the pretty flat color, the HDR. But what I noticed is because it's so incredibly wide, zoom, you got yourself another 48 megapixels at a 5x optical zoom, which can take you up to 120x. Software trick Samsung does by showing you where you are in the overall frame when you're zooming in, so you at least have an idea of what you're looking at. But most stuff you shoot past about 50x just looks not great, and the 120x photos just look like a smear of pixels, like a guessing game. Unless you know exactly what you're looking at, it's not gonna be great. I file this directly into the novelty drawer, but there is no doubt that you can get much sharper, like 5 to 20x zoom photos from this camera. And they still have shallow depth of field, which is pretty nuts. All three of these cameras will shoot night mode photos, and all three of these cameras will also shoot 8K video, which is pretty great, although 8K video is locked up to 24 FPS, so I found myself shooting in the correct frame rate at 4K 30. You can also do 4K 60, but pretty impressive on the video front. And you can see the staggered HDR really working here. I feel like I can see way more into the shadows with this video camera, like in clips like this. You can switch also somewhat smoothly between all three cameras while shooting video at 4K, which is sweet. And I was impressed with the color consistency between all three cameras. Now, the minimum focus distance is not nearly the same from the telephoto when it kicks in. So if you're shooting something close up, probably don't switch to the telephoto. But aside from that, whether you like the color tuning or not, they've gotten it very consistent between all the cameras. It's good stuff. But something else I've noticed with Mi 11 Ultra, it seems to be working really in certain time periods, and the camera was the culprit here. But the other thing I noticed is just camera bump by adding a screen to the back, because why not? So actually I had to think about this. I'm not sure if it actually is the biggest ever camera bump by volume, just because phones like the Lumia 1020 exist. But this display on the back here is pretty funny. Fun fact, it's actually the same display that's in Xiaomi's Mi Band 5. It's like they realized they had some extras left over and just thought, hey, why don't we put these in the back of the phone? So it's a 1.1 inch AMOLED touchscreen with a 126 by 294 resolution. It's not super sharp at all. I can literally see pixels. And it's also not very bright, but it can show you a couple things. It can show you the time, your battery status, and a notification light if you have any waiting for you. And I can also show you any number of preloaded images with a black background that's kind of cool if you just want a cactus on the back of your phone all the time. But there's also a whole customizer built into the software where you can put a text quote permanently on the back of your phone, or even upload your own custom image, hence the thumbnail for this video. Not quite as custom as the ROG Phone 5 Ultimate, but it's up there. But really, the only actually useful thing I've seen it do is act as a tiny viewfinder for the main camera. So you can take high quality selfies on those massive sensors, and you can zoom in and out and everything, and that'll be a much higher quality selfie than the perfectly average 20 megapixel selfie camera could ever manage. Other than that, but not as impressive as 67 watt wired charging and 67 watt wireless charging on an optional Xiaomi wireless indoors, outdoors, pretty much everywhere. And honestly, it's got pretty much every other high-end spec you can actually think of in a phone. Like, just name a high-end spec in your head. This phone's got it, all right? Great haptics, check. IP68, check. Reverse wireless charging, yeah, check, 10 watts. It's got an IR blaster, okay? Great speaker quality, oh, double check. There's Harman Kardon dual stereo speakers on the top and the bottom. And it's all wrapped up in Xiaomi software that I've talked about a little more in my Mi 11 video, but that I do think is also getting really good. This phone does it all short of levitating, but I just do want to land back on that build one more time. You see the photos and the crazy bump on the back of the phone, and it just looks like a lot. But once you actually start to use the phone, I found that my finger, I naturally kind of rested right underneath the camera, sort of propped it up like that. And that was kind of nice. And so I know a lot of you were saying, oh, just make this phone thicker, give it a 10,000 milliamp hour battery and get rid of the camera bump. But this phone is already quite heavy. It's a ceramic back phone, first of all. And if I weighed it, which I did, literally up against some of the other flagships, it's one of the heaviest. And so if you add all of that battery, you lose the grip of the camera, and then it's just one big slick thing. Like, I get where you're coming from, but I feel like it's surprisingly not too top heavy with this current design, and I actually don't mind it. So just something that you get the difference between seeing the phone and actually using the phone. At the end of that, let me know in the comment section below. It's probably going to keep getting more extreme from here on out.